Good afternoon. I'm Philip Khoury. I'm Associate Provost at MIT with responsibility for the arts, and I want to welcome all of you to this public presentation by Robert Lepage, who is the recipient of the 2012 Eugene McDermott Award in the Arts at MIT. We're very pleased also to have with us Peter Gelb, the General Manager of the Metropolitan Opera. We look forward to a stimulating and lively dialogue about technology and stagecraft and storytelling. Before introducing our distinguished guests, let me say a few words about the McDermott Award, which is one of the most generous arts prizes in the United States. Established in 1974 by Margaret McDermott to honor her late husband Eugene, co-founder of Texas Instruments, the award recognizes individuals whose artistic trajectory and body of work indicate that they will achieve the highest distinction in their fields. The award is considered an investment in the recipient's future creative work, rather than a prize for a particular project or a lifetime of achievement. Most of all, however, the McDermott Award reflects MIT's commitment to risk-taking, problem-solving, and connecting creative minds across disciplines. I want to especially thank Mary McDermott Cook, daughter of Margaret and Eugene McDermott, who is here this afternoon, late evening, in the front row here. She continues the great commitment of her family to the arts here at MIT, in their hometown Dallas, and in many, many other places. Mary, delighted you're here with us to help honor Robert Lepage. Now, recounting just a few aspects of Robert Lepage's work will reveal why he is such an ideal recipient of this award. Lepage's multidisciplinary work defies categorization. As you will have learned from the extraordinary array of work in the timeline that was projected as you entered this auditorium, Mr. Lepage is equally talented as a playwright, actor, film director, and stage director. He and his production company, Ex Machina, have toured numerous productions internationally to critical and popular acclaim, from large multiple-part productions to one-person plays, including the Anderson Project, recently presented in Boston by Arts Emerson. He has created 2 Cirque du Soleil productions, Ka, a resident show at MGM Grand in Las Vegas, and Totem, which will be seen in Boston in June. He has acted in or directed numerous feature films. He stage-directed 2 musical tours for rock star Peter Gabriel, who I just learned was here at our Media Lab just yesterday. He has created spectacular outdoor illuminations and architectural projections in Québec Harbor, using the surface of the Bunge grain elevators as a giant screen. Spectacular, really. And you will understand why Lepage's work resonates with the creative values of the MIT community. We at MIT particularly admire his willingness to cross disciplinary boundaries in the pursuit of innovation, the collaborative enterprise that drives his creative output, his relentless experimentation with new technologies in order to reimagine for the 21st century the ritual origins of multiple performance genres, including, of course, opera, which some people would say is inherently the most multidisciplinary of performance genre. Which brings me to our second distinguished guest today, Peter Gelb. Since becoming general manager of the Metropolitan Opera in 2006, Peter Gelb has launched a host of initiatives to revitalize the Met and to connect it to a wider audience. Under his leadership, the company has recruited many of the world's great theater directors, including Robert Lepage. He also increased the annual number of new productions, secured more performances from top singers, and he launched the trailblazing Peabody Award-winning series, The Met Live in HD, which represents live performance transmissions in movie theaters around the world. I'm interested to note that much earlier in his career, in 1978, Peter Gelb was an assistant manager of the Boston Symphony Orchestra, so perhaps one could say that his illustrious career was launched right here in Boston. In any case, he has won 6 Emmy Awards and 3 Peabody Awards since then. We owe special thanks to Mr. Gelb for being here today, since he must return to New York immediately after this program in order to make the curtain for a performance tonight of Das Rheingold, the first opera in Wagner's 4-part Der Ring des Nibelungen. Directed by Robert Lepage, the 4 operas in the cycle have been presented over the last 2 seasons and are being presented this month and in May as a complete cycle for the first time. Now, Robert Lepage first began directing opera in 1993 and first collaborated with the Metropolitan Opera in 2008 and 9 in that season when he directed La Damnation de Faust, The Damnation of Faust by Hector Berlioz. Lepage's production used an innovative combination of virtual scenery, interactive video projections, and aerial acrobatics to dramatize the timeless melodramatic plot of sin and redemption. His transformation of Wagner's 16-hour ring cycle, however, is the most ambitious production the Met has ever attempted. The 4 works in the cycle are opera's most challenging and transcendent epic. The Met's new production, which premiered between September 2010 and January 2012, uses a groundbreaking single set comprised of 24 movable planks, which together with computerized projections form every mythic scene and action that Wagner imagined. We at MIT appreciate the ambition of this undertaking, especially the scale of imagination and the technical complexity that the new production entails. And we appreciate the risk-taking involved in reconceptualizing a revered masterpiece in this way, including the controversy that such bold moves can and will generate. Productive disruptions of norms are healthy and necessary for innovation, for they generate new thinking and inventions for the benefit of us all. That's very Lepage, and it's very MIT, too. We look forward now to hearing from these 2 great creative minds about the ring and other aspects of Mr. Lepage's diverse and expansive body of work. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Robert Lepage and Peter Gelb.
I'm not used to sitting in such a deep... I don't know what controversy you're talking about, but I'm Peter Gelb. This is Robert Lepage, as I'm sure you know. I'm very happy to be here to have this conversation in front of you with Robert. It's true that my career did begin in Boston, but I haven't been here much in recent years. I mostly stay in contact by watching Yankee Red Sox games. But I won't go any further. I don't like gloating. The Red Sox win there, sure. When I was appointed to the Met at the end of 2004, I was determined to reconnect the Met to the cultural mainstream, which is not necessarily an easy thing to do with an opera company with a 128 or 129-year-old history, and that was in recent decades not used to making much in the way of change. But I was determined that we had to change the very essence of what we put on the stage and the way in which we connected with our audiences, both inside the Opera House and outside the Opera House. And I sought the help of a number of leading directors, but the person whose help I sought, I think, first was Robert Lepage, because I had known his work and known him for about 20 years, and I believed that the way to change the basic fabric of opera required bringing in great creative minds and visionary people with visionary ideas, such as Robert. And in fact, there's no director in the world that I know of today who deserves, I think, this prestigious award more than Robert. His visual imagination and knack at storytelling is what sets him apart from all other, not to say there aren't other great directors who have great visual imagination and are great storytellers, but Robert's has an individual voice which is remarkable in that it is also, no 2 projects of his seem to bear any direct visual connection to each other. Each thing he does, which is very unusual, I think, for directors, each project that he takes on really has a soul and a life and artistic character of its own. So I, because of that, and because of my knowledge of Robert's career, I sort of instinctively understood that it was he who I had to go to direct the Met's new ring cycle, which is, because of its scale and sheer length at 16 hours long, 4 operas, is the single, even if you don't approach it on the scale that Robert approached it on, it's the largest undertaking any opera company could possibly take on. And since I believe in taking risks in order to change the face of opera and advance it, I embraced and supported all of Robert's revolutionary technological ideas for this ring, even though sometimes it seemed that my fate and the fortunes of the Met were swinging in the balance. But for a new ring, I would rather gamble with Robert than with anybody else. And in a few hours, as Philip mentioned, a few hours from now, we're beginning the first really tightly scheduled ring cycle of this new production, which is why I have to fly back to New York. Robert wisely is staying behind, but his work has been done. Last night, in fact, timed with the opening of our new ring cycles, was the premiere of a fascinating documentary film about the making of this ring, in which documentary filmmaker Susan Frumke spent, I guess, about 5 years following Robert and his team, and because of my long relationship with her and trust in her, I gave her sort of complete access to everything that went on at the Met, almost complete access. And the film premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival last night and will be shown in movie theaters later on, in fact, next month. But I thought it would be interesting just to get things rolling. We have a lot of, Robert has brought a lot of video and his colleagues have arranged for us to see a lot of interesting examples of his work. But I thought just to give you a sense of the scale and scope of this new ring, a taste of it, we would play this trailer for the movie, for this documentary, which we're going to do so now. If we could play the Wagner Dream trailer, please. Nothing defines an opera house more than new productions. Opera has to be constantly renewing itself.
The Metropolitan Opera kicks off its new season with the lavish production of Wagner's 4-part ring cycle. It's the most ambitious production the Met has ever mounted.
This is as big as it gets for an opera company.
No new production is more significant.
The story of the ring is the creation and the destruction of the world. 16 hours of opera. This is an intense challenge for any director.
Robert Lepage, one of theater's great visionaries.
We use state-of-the-art tools to present a really fresh, new, avant-garde, crazy ring.
I went to Iceland, digging into the Icelandic roots, tectonic sets, breaking apart and separating suits, the Scandinavian myths.
I love Wagner. I'm afraid of what they're going to do with it, though.
Parts of it have always been unstageable, swimming underwater, walking over rainbow bridges, riding on winged horses.
Nobody has gotten it perfectly right.
That's what we're trying to do.
Deborah Voigt, you'll be singing Brunhilde for the very first time.
There are only 1 or 2 or 3 Brunhildes who can command the stage at the Met.
There are so many challenging vocal passages. It can be defining in her career.
It was so daunting for such a time that I thought, are you out of your mind? It's a very emotional journey, this one.
Have you seen those sets?
I'm a little bit nervous about standing on it.
Emergency stop.
You were never in danger. Everything was locked.
I don't want to lose my feet or whatever.
This is when the real pros come out.
I'm so scared. I'm sorry.
Everything okay?
So far, so good.
I always compare it to, being kind of a Christopher Columbus. You have to convince a whole crew that you're not going to fall off the edge of the earth, that you are going to discover something. It's there and you'll get there.
Is like.
We want more.
So, it's that's just the tip of the iceberg.
You can say that again.
So Robert, why don't you? I know that you believe that storytelling is more important than anything else in anything you stage, and technology obviously played a huge part in this production. But maybe you can talk a little bit about how how you harness the technology and why you harnessed the technology that you did harness, and the story of how you came to this. And
yeah, well, actually, I've always been an artist who had problems really defining himself. I'm a stage director, but I'm also an actor. I'm also a filmmaker, and or I'm all of the above, whatever. But it's not important exactly what I do for it. The idea is that I like mingling with different people who work in different disciplines, and I think that the opera, certainly, well, the stage in general, but let's say that the opera, more than theater, more than dance, is a great meeting point, and it's. Wagner spoke of the Gesamtkunstwerk. He dreamed of the Gesamtkunstwerk, which means the together artistic work, which is a literal translation. It means the meeting point, the gathering of all sorts of people from different disciplines. And I really believe that opera is the great multidisciplinary way of working, way of telling a story. So of course, it's always a question of finding the balance between who tells what part of the story and what's redundant and what's overstated. So for me, the whole technological research or presence in my work is just there as a tool to merge these disciplines together. I work in a field, well, I'm mainly a stage director from the theater, so that means I work a lot in the live world, but I'm also interested by the recorded word. I like doing films once in a while. I like doing television stuff, and I think that in the 21st century, audiences are going to want something more of theater and something more of film. And the qualities of theater are being more and more asked from the recorded medium, which has become a kind of, of course you have the intimacy in movies because of the close-ups and all that, and the great sound, but you don't have the liveness, the interaction with film that you have in theater, and then vice versa. With the theater world, you don't have the sense of intimacy if you're in a 2,000-seat room. You're not as close to the actor. So how do you get all of the advantages of film? So I think that the way for these two worlds that are very, very close cousins, because we're dealing with actors, we're dealing with writers, with storytellers, and we're trying to convey the same ideas, the same emotions. I think that the more the technology is the same, the more that the lighting you use in film and the lighting that I use on stage is the same instruments, or the data or the codes or any kind of technology that is being used in both worlds is common. Then there's a dialogue, then there's an openness, and then I believe that the 21st century will probably be the scene of some eighth form of art, which will be a great meeting point of all of those disciplines. And of course, this is one attempt. The opera world is a great place to try that. It's full of traps and obstacles, but as we say in Buddhism, your obstacles are your friends. So of course I've made a lot of friends on the experience of this experience. But I believe in that, really. I really believe that I still believe in the stage. I still believe in the people gathering in the same room, seeing artists taking risks, because it's a very, very risky thing, and certainly opera is a sport. And actually what I find remarkable in your way of presenting it in the HD transmissions, it is like an exciting hockey game or an exciting football game, because you have the singers concentrating and stepping on stage, singing their heart out, and then as soon as they walk off, you catch them and you say, "So how was it?" And all that. So it's a bit crazy, but for some reason, opera lends itself to that, because it's a larger than life effort. It's a larger-than-life way of telling a story, and I think I really, truly still believe in opera and its potential. It's just been ignored a bit, or it hasn't been as accessible, let's say, to everybody as, in the past century as it should have been. But it used to be in the 19th century much more accessible and much more popular.
Well, obviously, I mean, some of the problems are the length of operas and the languages that you have to read subtitles for. And it's sort of like going to a foreign film or something. You have to be able to be willing to accept.
Absolutely, things. Yeah. There's a lot of conventions, but that's the thing that I find extraordinary about the HD transmissions from my hometown in Quebec City. The rooms are filled with people who've never been to the opera before. You see grandfathers and their children explaining the story. Of course, it's in German with English subtitles, and they're French-speaking people. I mean, of course, but there's a passion, there's a mystery there. There's something that seems to attract them to. So I think there's a lot of hope in this.
But getting to the essence of the ring, I mean, I think since this is probably the single biggest project I guess you've undertaken, as well as I have at the Met. Can there has been some, as Philip mentioned, some controversy around it, which seems to be mostly out of your choice to, even though you're using the most modern technological means, to tell the story that Wagner wrote. As opposed to doing it in some sort of more abstract, metaphorical kind of fashion.
Well, there's something, I mean, very few people know this, is that I hope Wagner fans or opera fans will eventually have the chance to read the whole score and the whole libretto of The Ring. But it reads like a film script. And
do you want to just? I mean, I presume most people know the story of The Ring, but do you want to give it?
You really want me to put myself through that exercise? but
we can tell it together.
No, but the thing is, the reason why I say it reads like a film script is because what Wagner asks of the stage designer and lighting designer and the director, what he asks of us is a movie, and at a time where film didn't
exist.
And in
fact, when Wagner, as is pointed out in this documentary, when Wagner created The Ring, he built this theater to put it on in Bayreuth, and then produced it, but was very unhappy with the results.
Of course,
because he didn't have the technical means to represent the story, this impossible story that he had composed.
It just means that he was a Freudian before Freud. He was cinematic before cinema. So that's the great genius of Wagner, and so
that's one of the reasons why you decided to
absolutely and to put myself at the service of these demands. So of course there's a lot of people who think that there's no personal vision of The Ring, but for me, it's my entrance into the Wagnerian world. I have in front of me a monument that's much bigger than myself, and I want to learn from it. So I try to be as faithful to the story as possible, and in every detail, and see how, in this day and age, if we do have the technology to accomplish many miracles, how can we actually illustrate these things? And sometimes people have been very critical of some elements that I've staged that were actually demands from Wagner.
Right. Well, I think the public loves it, and the proof of that is in the reaction inside the Opera House. We have some video examples of some of the things that you did, which Wagner, as you said, demanded or asked for various actions to be depicted that opera houses, when they produce The Ring, never do, because they don't have the scenery or the wherewithal to do it. Yeah. So you, with this machine that you and your designers created, invented, set out from the beginning to be able to realize all these scenic ideas of Wagner that typically are heard musically but never actually represented on the stage. So do you want to? Is there one you want to?
Well,
show?
Maybe there's one of the first excerpts is maybe the descent down into Valhalla. To Nibelheim. Actually, there is a huge chunk of music where there's a suggestion by Wagner, where we actually see Wotan.
So that's just to set the stage for this. So Wotan, the king of the gods, has reneged on his deal with the giants who built his new castle, and he realizes though that he's in a lot of trouble, and to get out of it, he and his aide-de-camp Loga, the god of fire, decide to go down into the underworld where Nibelheim, where Alberic, the dwarf, who was previously in the beginning of the opera, has stolen the gold from the Rhine, which sets off this whole cataclysmic chain of events. Yeah. Alberic is down in Nibelheim with his fellow dwarves, making more treasure and planning for an assault on the gods and the powers above. So Wotan goes down there with Loga. Yeah, normally this is not seen. A curtain comes in, and you hear the music, and the next. And
you're supposed to imagine.
You're supposed to imagine it.
Of course, if you know the libretto and if you know the story. So maybe we could look at an excerpt. Right. Of course, we'll be doing this a bit accelerated because the excerpts can be a bit longish, but we might speed it up on the way so you can get to appreciate all of it.
Although this one might wreak havoc with the music.
Yeah. So in fact,
they eventually get there.
Yeah, they eventually get it. Actually, maybe to give you a sense of the scope, maybe we could watch another excerpt, which is the excerpt at the end of the Valkyrie, when Wotan puts his daughter Brunhilde to sleep. It gives you maybe a better scope of what the whole project was.
Right.
And
we should point out that this is maybe the first opera certainly the first opera in the history of the Met to utilize stunt doubles.
Mm-hmm. Also, but some of the stunts have been actually performed sometimes by some of the performers, some of the singers.
Those were two acrobats.
Yeah, absolutely. But
we don't normally send our singers down.
But it happened at times that some singers,
unless you want to get rid of them.
Some singers would show up and look at the stunt and say, "I can do that." You'd say, "Well, not sure you should," but actually, you actually got to do it. So maybe we could look at maybe another excerpt right away, just to give you a sense of the scope of the. So, so what you've seen basically is the end of Valkyrie and
the second opera.
The second opera, and so what was very challenging for us is to try to create a stage that has something very traditional about it, because it's actually 24 planks, and when it starts, it's in a rake position, so it looks like a traditional opera house raked floor. And it all looks very, very normal. But then eventually, when it starts with the beginning of the Rheingold, and we try to, normally it's the music of the Rhine, so the plank starts rocking, and they eventually become very, very sensuous water, and eventually evolve into all sorts of different locations. And of course, as the story evolves, it illustrates many, many, many things. So. What it was inspired by, basically, was the idea that some of those, most of the ring comes from the Icelandic Eddas, and the Eddas are pretty much like the kind of a Bible in Icelandic and Viking culture. So Wagner, we keep forgetting that Wagner actually borrowed those heroes and these stories and to create the story of the ring. And because of that, and I'd been to Iceland a few times, and was struck how because in a past life I was interested in geography and geology, and I was all into tectonic plates and the movement of continents and volcanic activity and all that.
You did a show called...
I didn't even do a show called Tectonic Plates. And Iceland is, I don't know if you've been to Iceland before, but it's a tiny island of a country that's sitting in the middle of the ridge, where actually the world is, America and Europe are kind of separating, and even the countries separating. Each year there's a fault, and that opens 6 centimeters each year. So it's a moving place. The ground is a moving. It's not a stable place, and it has all sorts of eruptions and all sorts of states and all that. And when you visit Iceland, you have a very different take on the ring, because you go, oh, I can understand somebody, a culture living here and imagining how all elements manifest themselves, and how they do believe that there is a god of fire and a god of thunder and a god of this and a god of that. So I wanted to create something that would be tectonic in a certain way. There was some kind of, where the ground wouldn't be very stable, which was very alarming for a lot of singers, because well, you're walking on something that moves all the time.
That the singer, what we just saw, the end of Valkyrie, was the singer Bryn Terfel, who's Wotan, the ruler of the gods on the foreground, and he's just sentenced his daughter Brunhilde for disobeying him to an endless sleep surrounded by fire.
On the top of the mountain.
On top of the mountain. But the actual singer who plays Brunhilde had exited, and this was her stunt double.
By a body double, yeah.
Sort of the operatic equivalent of the piano drop.
Yeah. But, the soprano drop.
So, yeah. What else should we talk about the ring? Do you want to talk about about the creation of the design of the set, or do you have some animation that could be maybe?
Yeah, we have, just to understand a bit how the premise of all this. We have a clip of the set designer Cal Filion, who's a set designer who's actually an amazing stage engineer. I've been working with him in Cirque du Soleil a lot, and doing some other theatrical creations, actually. But
you work actually with many, we're going to get to that in a little while, but you're unlike most directors have one team they work with. You work with many teams, many different directors, yes. Many different designers.
Yes, absolutely, right. Yeah. Of course, Cal was for a long time the principal one, because I was asked to do, I've always interested to do these big shows and all that, and Cal has, his back is strong enough to actually take on these projects. So maybe we could show some of his 3D animations of this set, so you'd understand a bit more.
And that's something we could speed up, right?
Yeah, this we could speed up, yeah. And it's actually, so this is the principle, when we were saying that it starts with the this is the beginning where the Rhine maidens come out, and of course they're suspended by the set. And
so this was created in 2007 or 8? Or
yeah, absolutely. So it's a kind of a sped up version. So
it was the Rhine maidens frolicking in the Rhine,
right. And then eventually they come across. I think in this version, so it becomes a beach, and then they comes out with the Rhine gold, who in those days was supposed to be a big golden cloth, but that all changed. And then, of course, they're being brought down back into the depths of the Rhine, and then we had in those days we had Wotan and Fricka sleeping, and I guess so. It shows you a bit how we played around with the actual set. This is those are the giants visiting, because we kind of tried to envision the giants as two giant hands coming to them and saying, "We want to be paid." so we created these giant hands, and the hands would actually come and kidnap Freya. And then after that, they all decided to go down to. That's one of the excerpts that we saw earlier on, when it becomes a giant staircase, and decide to go down to Nibelheim. So of course, you have to understand that in those days we didn't have the vaguest idea how we were going to do this. We just thought it would be an interesting way of doing it. So then, of course, the set became the body of the dragon, and it's interesting to see it this way because it's quite naked. Because all of this is there's a lot of interactive projections on this set, but this was like the bare bones of the whole piece. So I don't know if we have the equivalent for Valkyrie or for the others, but
I think that's
pretty much
what
it.
We've got. Yeah.
Okay.
Are there any other?
Well, maybe just to maybe give you an example of people think I'm obsessed by big machines and technology and all that. I always end up working with these things, but I'm interested in low tech also, and in the very beginning of how you use technology. And I did this other opera that's performing right now, because they're on strike in Lyon. But this week I had the Nightingale, Stravinsky piece that I've been working on, and we went to Vietnam to meet with some Vietnamese water puppet masters, and the whole adventure that time was to convince opera houses to empty the orchestra pit, to put the orchestra on stage, to fill the orchestra pit with water.
We have not done that at the moment.
And the actual singers are waist deep in water and manipulate Vietnamese water puppets and sing. So maybe we have some excerpts of that. We could show you some of the stuff that we've managed to do. And that's in Lyon right now, and it's been. So in this case, there's no projections, there's no engineering. It's good old puppetry, and so you have bunraku puppetry involved, and this is actually a singer. And the chorus in the back all have had to learn how to manipulate Taiwanese style puppets. And
really fantastic.
Yeah, so this is one of the excerpts of the piece. We also, in the first part of that opera, we also worked with very, very, very low tech, with a lot of shadow play. So maybe we could show you some excerpts of the first part. It's a rare Stravinsky piece that's rarely done, and so there's a lot of hand shadows, and that's all done live on stage.
audience gets to see both, right?
Yeah, absolutely, because that's one of the things that's that I think is interesting. Because yesterday I was part of a panel about the world of illusions and theatrical illusions and all that, and how one of the important things about any kind of illusion or the use of technologies is to actually have confidence in the audience and their intelligence, and actually show them how things are made. So people actually see on the side all of the hand, shadow, and all of that. But of course, the human eye is always more interested in fantasy. So you eventually always look for the fantastical. I did a show once called The Far Side of the Moon, where I would kind of crawl on the floor, and I had a mirror in diagonal, and you would get the illusion that I was actually floating in space. And of course, all of this was exposed. The audience could see me dragging myself on the floor, and they would see the effect up in the mirror. And even though they would see how I do it, they would always be drawn by the effect. So I trust the audience thirst for fantasy and for poetry.
I think it's marvelous the way you do combine sort of low tech and new. I remember when we were first talking about The Ring, when I was pursuing you in London. You were doing an opera at the Royal Opera House, or rather it was after that. You were doing the Anderson project in London, and I went to watch that. It was a wonderful one-man show, like other one-man shows you've done, where you play multiple characters. And at one point in the show, you walk across the stage as one character, pass behind a tree, and then emerge on the other side without breaking stride, dressed completely differently as another character.
Because those are all old tricks of the old.
I remember saying to you afterwards, "How did you do that?" And you said, "Oh, that's a 18th century."
Yeah, it's actually a body double who's hiding in the tree, who actually, and then I get to have a glass of water and hide for a while. So they're all 19th century tricks. So I'm fascinated by that, because I think that we're in a world of razzmatazz. We go to see 3D films and we watch television, and everything is into special effects and all of that. And very often you're a bit alienated by all of that, because you always go, how did they do that? Or I didn't understand, how did they do that? But when in the theater, you have the possibility to actually show the strings and show how it's done, and give a chance to the audience to use their intelligence and their creativity. And even if they do find how you do that, it's part of the enjoyment of the whole thing.
When we were talking about The Ring at first, I remember you told me that you had recently directed this new show in Las Vegas. When it was that the first or second Cirque du Soleil?
It was the first show I did.
The first show you did for Cirque du Soleil, called Ka, which you suggested I might want to go and check out, because you told me that you were going to use some of the technological ideas that you developed for that in the service of The Ring.
Yeah.
And that we would maybe Cirque du Soleil shouldn't hear this, but that basically the Met was going to be the beneficiary of this $200 million commercial project in Las Vegas, which had the most amazing effects. Obviously, it was a whole different type of pop culture kind of event, but some of that technology, in terms of motion control and
also interactive video.
Interactivity was you developed for that show and then used it now in the Ring.
And actually, I think in The Ring, the technology caught up with the ideas, which is kind of nice. But in the days of Cirque du Soleil, there were still very, very bulky ideas. I know we have some clips of some of these things. Maybe we could show. There's maybe the battle scene
from Ka.
From we could maybe show that where we tried to use interactive video for the first time, and some of these effects have found themselves in. So, of course, this looks like an overhead shot of a battle, but actually the whole stage is vertical, and they're actually, the thing is happening like this. And
so can you explain, how does it work?
Well, actually, they all have a harness, and in their hand they have like a little button, and that they actually pull themselves up with this old button. They push on the button, and it determines the speed at which they go up and down, and so they're completely independent of the.
But they're being tracked by infrared sensors.
And then what you see at the bottom, the water ripples and all of that. Actually, the floor is a sensitive floor that we created, that we invented at Cirque du Soleil in 2003, I think it was. So that actually the wall in which you're crashing to do this knows at what speed you're coming in, at what velocity, where you are. So the video actually reacts to you. But I mean, the point I wanted to make with this excerpt is that, and the same thing for the Met, is that all of these technologies and these effects are there to be an echo of whatever the performer does. The thing is not to try to draw the attention. These effects don't draw the attentions to themselves. The idea is to try to magnify whatever the performer has done, the velocity, the strength. And in the ring, there's actually some great moments where what people see on stage, let's say it's a snowstorm, or if it's the wind that's in the trees, all of that is triggered by the sound that comes from the pit. And depending of the sibilance, the dynamics, the velocity, whatever happens that night.
Almost all the singers in the ring are mic'd.
Yeah.
Not to project their voices into the theater, but to help interact with the scenic effects that are created.
Exactly. So a lot of the effects in the ring are triggered by whatever the performance is that night. And so of course it's very tricky, because you always have to find the balance in these things, and you don't want these effects to draw attention to themselves. But of course, there's always that risk, if people have never seen these things for the first time. They
I know. Last night, after the showing of the film at Tribeca, J. Hunter Morris, who was this miraculous discovery, who was a cover for the role of Siegfried, possibly the hardest tenor role in all of opera, who stepped in 3 days before the premiere because the tenor who was supposed to sing it wasn't well and couldn't go on. And Jay was saying last night that he realized, because he was not familiar with the set, he had to get familiar very fast, that as he was walking across the set in the love duet with Brunhilde that takes place at the end of Siegfried, when he discovers her, and he's the hero who unlocks her from the sleep that she's been sentenced to by her father, he realized that as he was walking, leaves were moving around the stage that were interactive virtual leaves, and when he kicked one, it actually moved out of the way. so he was surprised. He was surprised as he interacted himself, which also I think added to the wonder of his performance, perhaps.
Well, that's an interesting thing, because actually when you do get to work with the singers, and some of them, of course, are so preoccupied by being heard and being being there where they should be in the score, and having eye contact with the conductor, and also trying to perform and trying to be a good listener. So an opera singer's mind is very, very busy when he sings, and you try to say, well, there's also all this world around you that if ever you want to use it, use it. So of course some singers, and certainly the singers who sing the part for the first time, will be less generous with you, but on that aspect. But people like Bryn Tefel and who's done it, who know the part so well and are great, would climb on the set when it's not time to climb on it, and would do. So I want to ride this. I want to ride it, and and we'd actually have fun with the interaction and the video and all that. So I think with time, people will get used to these new tools and these new possibilities, I think.
So right now, I wasn't really aware of this until I asked to see what you were doing at the moment and in the world. You have, where's the list here somewhere? You actually have this very moment 4 different theatrical shows: Lip Sync, Blue Dragon, The Anderson Project, and a new show called Spades that I don't know about, which all of them are on tour. In the case of Spades, it's opening in 2 weeks. You have The Ring playing at the Met. You have Nightingale, Rossignol, possibly playing in Lyon if the strikers come back to work. You have two Cirque du Soleil shows playing simultaneously. One is Totem is coming to Boston in June. You have your annual architectural visual project, the Image Mill. So it's no wonder you're hard to get a hold of. And then in the creative oven right now, you have what do you have? Another show. Maybe you could explain what Spades is, because there's another playing card show called Diamonds, which is being developed.
Well, actually, Spades is part of the playing card.
Right.
I think that's it.
And The Tempest for the Met,
a
contemporary opera by Thomas Addis that has already had 2 productions since its premiere in London in 2004 or 5. And which you just were working on workshopping last week.
To Montreal, yeah.
So
this is quite exciting.
How do you do all these things at once?
Well, I'm very well organized, very well structured. I have I'm a very, very chaotic person. The way I work in a very intuitive way. So
nobody's has this many shows going on at the same time.
Well, maybe
that I know of.
Bob Wilson probably has a few of those, and I could name a few.
His move at a slower pace.
Okay, yeah, of course. For some reason, as I get older, I get more and more stuff like. No, but the thing that has to be known is that I work in a very, very intuitive way. I don't work in an intellectual, organized way and all that. But I have tons of people around me to help me out.
But it all takes place where Robert works. His headquarters, which you developed in the '90s, I guess, is this converted firehouse barracks. It was a firehouse and the sleeping quarters called La
Caserne.
La Caserne, which means that, I guess.
Yeah.
Where all the creative stuff happens.
Yeah, pretty much. That's the starting place.
So how many people do you have in there doing stuff?
Well, maybe we have at the Caserne maybe 20-some people who are permanent, but there's like hundreds of people that work there a year, and we work also we co-produce and exchange with a lot of people around the world. But I think the idea, and I'm not saying there's a secret recipe to be able to do so many things at the same time, it's just that you have to be not only well-supported, well-structured, well-organized by extremely intelligent and structured people around you, but you also have to leave time for things to happen. So, for example, when we started working on The Ring, 5-6 years ago, and you work on The Ring for maybe 2 weeks, and then you let it there for 4 months, and in the meantime you're working on a new opera or on another show, on a creation or on the circus show, and they also go through the same kind of process. So after a while you can actually manage a lot of things at the same time, and they kind of cook, and it's slow food, I'd call it. And so I'm very privileged now, because I'm in a position where I never say yes to a project that's going to happen this summer or in the fall. I say, okay, in what year, and how can we space out the development phases of that project? And I think that's part of the secret, because a lot of stuff happens in the back of your head that you don't know about between these sessions. You work on, let's say we'd rehearse for 3 weeks on a project, and then everybody disappears for 4 months. And during that 4 months, you're not thinking of the project, but something in the back of your head, your subconscious actually mends stuff, finds solutions. So when you come back...
It's good for the creative
Absolutely,
process.
yeah. And all of these projects inform each other. So sometimes the answer to a problem on one project will be found in the other project, and all that. So that's also a very intricate system, and you can't command that. That happens. It just happens that way.
Are there any other examples of current stuff that you're?
I don't know.
Are you doing that you'd like to talk about? How about the Image Mill?
Yep.
Which is this annual visual event that started a couple years ago. It's in Quebec City.
Yeah, at this place that you were mentioning earlier on, the Caserne, which is the fire hall, our studio, our lab in Quebec City, where we develop most of our things. We have a lot of interesting creative minds that gravitate around us. It feels at times a bit like MIT, and that's why I feel a bit at home here. In that sense, we have some really interesting minds, and so the Image Mill was created during the 2008 celebrations of the 400th anniversary of Quebec City. So I had been commissioned to do some kind of event, and we chose to do the world's largest architectural projection. It's actually 0.6 kilometers long. It's in the Guinness Book of Records. Well, if I'm going to brag about something, and well, maybe we could show some images as we're speaking, just to give you an idea of the scope of it, or the and what it is. So here you see it's in the harbor in Quebec City, and those are 86 grain silos. The building that you see there. There's this huge thing that's actually blocking the view from the river in Quebec City. So we decided to transform it into some kind of projection surface, and we've managed with time to add 3D effects and all that. So this is a result of projections that we do. We pretend that the silos actually reveal their content, and it's quite a big. So this is in the context of the city. You see how big it is, and so it's seen from every point in the city, and people gather in the harbor to see it. But also it's seen from hotel rooms, and its soundtrack is on a radio channel that people can. So it's quite a big event. People come by boat. There's also people that visit the river during the daytime, and then they all kind of park their boats in the harbor and come to see. And basically what it does is the history of Quebec City, which is the oldest city in North America, in fact. And so it's the story of four different centuries, the 4 centuries and what they're about. And there's a lot of archives. And
how many projectors do you?
It's done with 20, in fact, it's 25 high-definition projectors, but there's probably 28 because there's always one that goes wrong. There's always, you know about that, there's always something that goes wrong in these big things. And it's all synchronized by the same computer. So it's a big team that works on that every year, and it was quite an event, and it's part of the signature of the city now.
That's fantastic. Of course, that's the downside of using all this technology is that when things do go wrong, you feel a little bit helpless.
Yeah, of course. And we've had our. I mean, but that's okay. That's part of the sport of theater. That's always what I say. I mean, just because we got accustomed to the guillotine of the opening night of a movie. You can't change a movie. The movie's out, it's there, distributed.
Right.
You can't do anything. But theater, it's a living animal, and it changes. And of course, some
the Ring has changed the entire culture and atmosphere of the Met in terms of inside the Met. Is the stage crew. We have 200 stagehands who work at the Met in order to move the scenery in and out of and to operate shows. We're a repertory theater with 7 shows a week. 2 different operas on Saturday, matinee and an evening performance, and a stage that is in constant use, where we have a rehearsal in the daytime. Today, for example, we were rehearsing a revival of Billy Budd, and now, right at this moment, the crew is frantically making sure that all the connections in the machine are ready for tonight's performance of Rheingold. Yeah. But what's different about the Ring in terms of the culture of the Met and the way the crew works is that for the first time they've never had to interact with scenery like this, because as computerized and advanced as the Ring is, ultimately as you evolve the designs, it came down to stagehands also manipulating the planks and holding the planks and having to, and a lot of the stage lifts of the Met being used to introduce various scenic elements. So it's interactive between people and the machinery.
And it's become also a bit puppet-like in a certain way. It's puppetry, and I have to say that the crew at the Met have been so proud of the whole project. And
they love it.
And they've invested themselves so much into this, and they're so proud of the whole production, and they've put so much creative energy. And
well, they love it. They've never been so stimulated. I mean, because every stagehand gets to really be involved in the show in a way they normally wouldn't be. Yeah. I thought it would be interesting perhaps to talk a little bit. Once you said to me, I remember some months ago that you, I don't know if you were actually a busker, but you said that you grew up with sort of this uniquely gifted group of Quebecois citizens who all sort of come from the same generation, including Guy de Liberté, the founder of Cirque du Soleil. So how did you begin? I mean,
well, actually, I studied at the conservatory to become an actor. But
in Canada?
In Quebec City. And so when I came out of the conservatory, I didn't think I'd have a career as an actor because I didn't have any casting for anything, you know, and in those days it was very, very kind of flower power, you know, we were very much into collective writing and doing political theater and all that. So I was pretty much doing that kind of thing. We would do stuff and we'd play in the street and we'd make the money that people would give us, and it was very influenced by the bread and puppet and the living theater and whatever movement was going on here in the United States. And never really thought that I'd have a career as an actor or a director, and you know, just always did these small little troupes and didn't have any big ambitions. And eventually it kind of caught on, and we started touring the world, and people started to be very interested in our work.
But touring on your own or with the group?
With the group, with the company, and for some reason, I know our work moved and interested, and people were identified themselves to what we were doing, and suddenly we started co-producing with people from all over the world, and we became, you know, very much in demand. But I always remembered that when I was in the conservatory, I was interested in acting and all that, but I spent way too much time with the people doing production. I was very interested in sound editing and lighting design and all these other things, and I'd always get flack from my teachers who would say, you're spending way too much time on these things and you should be working more on your acting and all that. So from the very, very beginning, I've always had a finger in every pie, and I never thought that would actually be a quality. It's always been seen as a flaw, and so with time it did. So it creates a kind of conscience of what theater is and how, and you have to be, I mean, if you want theater to survive, you have to be interested in all these things.
You've not only worked as an actor, you've worked as a dancer recently.
Recently, at age 50, at age 50, Sylvie Guillem, who's an amazing dancer, who's a star dancer, showed up at a performance of the Anderson Project in Australia and said, well, I'd like to work with you, and I said, fine, but I thought she wanted me to direct her, or to help her, because I know she wanted to maybe find a way to become an actress. So I said, well, fine, and we had a few meetings and all that, and at one point I said, you know, Sylvia, I'm not sure that I'm the right person to work with you because I'm not a choreographer and I'm not sure I understand very well. Or she said, I don't want you to choreograph me or to direct me, I want to dance with you. And with Sylvie Guillem...
You didn't have to say yes.
Well, no, but if Sylvie Guillem comes up to you and she says, I want to dance with you, you have to say yes to that. So I was at least 35 pounds larger, bigger, heavier, whatever you say, and I said, my God, this is suicidal. And but I said, why not? And we got together and developed this extraordinary story about Chevalier Déon. Anyways, it's difficult to explain, and it's classical dance, modern dance, theater, influenced by a lot of martial arts and all these things. And a year later, I was dancing. I was dancing at Sadler's Wells, and we just recently came back from Japan, and
it's a good way to keep your weight down.
Well, that's the problem. Is that I'm a squeeze box. I'm an accordion. That's just that every time we do the show, I have to lose a lot of weight to fit in my Alexander McQueen tights, and after that, when the show is off and there's a 6 months period between shows, I just kind of. Or just become this thing. So, but it's extraordinary, and it's great because you think, and of course Sylvie now is in maybe, I don't know exactly what age she is, but she's not in her 20s anymore, and she still works, and she still is an amazing artist, and so it kind of was a good example for him to say, well, you know, retirement's not an option. I think you could always learn at any age. And I like being surprised in my career by things like that. You know, suddenly somebody shows up in your dressing room and says, I want to dance with you, and you're 50 and you're out of breath and you want to die and you have to. So I like life-changing things. And the same thing happened with you when you showed up at Covent Garden and said, do you want to do the ring? And I went, oh my God. And you're, well, yeah, why not? Somebody offers you to climb Mount Everest, you have to do it. You know, and I don't know. I like that. I'm afraid somebody tonight is going to come up to me and suggest something. I don't know, but I don't know. It's the kind of thing. It's the kind of accidents you like to bump into. The kind of thing that's life changing.
So what are some of the future Mount Everests for you? I know you have this extraordinary theater project. You're building a theater, right?
Yeah, we're building
a theater. Can you talk about that?
Now. Yeah, because we have the Caserne in Quebec City, but we just received part of the funding to actually build a new room in Quebec City, an actual theater that's actually designed for our work, and where we also be presenting maybe small operas, circus shows. It's going to be a place called the Diamond. And the reason why it's called the Diamond, because the Diamond it's multifaceted, like our work, but also because Quebec City is built on Cape Diamond, because the French thought that there was a lot of, that's why they settled there. They saw this diamond, this shiny stuff. Of course, it's not diamonds at all. And also because when I opened that first center 20-some years ago, Bob Wilson was elegant enough to send me a video message where he said, our cities need centers, a diamond in an apple. Which is a very Bob Wilson thing to say, a diamond in an apple.
Of course.
And so he said, congratulations to Robert Lepage's center, and blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, this is a nice image, a diamond in an apple. And it's true. I mean, I think that our cultural centers, whether it's the Lincoln Center or the Met or whatever, this place here has to be, that's what we have to be like a shining jewel, and with all of the alchemic notions of what a jewel is.
Can you describe some of these shows that you have in the works right now?
There's a lot of them, but maybe I'd describe one because it's very long. But the one about the playing cards, and it also has to do with what I did here this week at MIT, is that part of the MIT events I was giving a workshop with some of to some of the students here about this theme of playing cards, and so after doing The Ring in 4-part epic, I'm doing yet another 4-part epic on playing cards, and of course the first part is called Spades, the second is Hearts, the third one is Diamonds, and the last one is Clubs, and it's a very long project. It's going to be 12 hours of theater eventually and all that, but we're premiering in Madrid in 2 weeks from now, Spades, and it's just a group of people that got together and started writing all these extraordinary stories about playing cards, which is a very, very inspiring object or a sensitive resource, and
so it's a collective.
So it's a collective effort. So that's pretty much what I'll be doing when I run off tomorrow.
You're going to Madrid tomorrow?
Well, I'm going to Quebec City for a while, but to sort out what we're going to be doing in Madrid 2 weeks from now. But it's a 3-hour show, and it's quite extraordinary because it's set in Las Vegas. The weekend when Celine Dion's show premiered at that was in I think in 2002 or 2003, and it's that weekend where she premiered her show at Caesar's Palace, and it's the same weekend when the Allies started to bomb Baghdad. So it's about 2 deserts and about 2 separate set of events that are interconnected, and so it's a crazy project.
Sounds great. We have a new production of Rigoletto next season set in Las Vegas.
Oh, really?
Yes.
See, there's rip-offs
1960.
1960. Been there, done that. Bought the T-shirt.
You're not directing it, Tony. Should we? ask the audience if they have any questions?
Yep.
They
I think that we have microphones,
microphones
standing by for you that will be brought in.
And Philip is going
there
to
there they are.
Come to our moderating aid. That is, if there are any questions.
We need you to come down. Thank you very much.
Yep. Oh, there are some questions.
And in the MIT tradition, if you just, state your name and very briefly who you are, what you are.
Hello. My name is Rhiannon. I'm a member of Homo sapiens sapiens, human. First, I just want to say, Monsieur Lepage, you're like a rock star to me. My kind of people, I'm like your groupie right now. So, yeah. You're my Elvis.
Thank you very much.
No hip wiggles necessary, don't worry. My question has to do with people like me. I just graduated from college with a degree in music and technology, and theater's my life. I'm part of Alpha Psi Omega. I love being on stage, off stage, backstage, building the stage, whatever stage. But the problem is, I just graduated college with a music and technology degree. I don't have any money. I don't have any time. I'm trying to work, trying to get a house. Real life is scary. So my question to you, before I can win the McDermott Award and do the ring cycle, what do I do? I'm kind of I'm kind of lost here. I'm wondering, I don't have the tools. I don't have tools. I don't have a workshop. I don't have the contacts, and I don't have the money to get any of it. What's my first step?
Well,
Save me.
I have to admit that the funding, the arts funding here in this country is still a big mystery to me. I don't really know how it works. I know there's some very generous people around who could help you out, but I know also that it's not necessarily a priority for governments or so that I know that in Canada we do have that great advantage that we have subsidies, but this being said, my company is not I don't get that much money from the governments. We get maybe 12% of our of the money that we generate, because we actually understood very early in the process that we had to go elsewhere to find it. That we traveled and we started doing ventures with people, and there are people who are ready to risk years in advance to work with you. They'll give you the money up front and say, well, when you're ready, when the work is ready. So sometimes when we can't find the solutions in our own surroundings, we have to kind of move around and maybe have to immigrate to Canada or embark on any kind of venture with people abroad and eventually be recognized as an artist.
But there are theater programs in companies in this country that have apprentice programs, and if that's there are different ways of getting your foot in the door.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Matt Gray. I actually teach acting and directing here at Northeastern University, and I also have a Canadian passport, so it's nice to see a familiar face. I'm really interested in sort of some nuts and bolts things. The theater kind of traditional timeline is to add tech at the end, and so many of your pieces over the years, both in theater and also in opera, integrate technology so beautifully in the storytelling. I'm curious, at what point do they begin to enter into the process with the performers, how they respond to it, and how important that process is to you?
Well, very often it's from day one. I know that Brecht, at the end of his life, Brecht was working on this idea that everybody has to work, everybody has to be in the rehearsal room on day one, even if they don't have much to do. They should be there. And of course, that's a very expensive process, but there's people who are ready to do that for very cheap. And I know that, for example, when I did The Far Side of the Moon, it was a one-man show, but the room was crowded with people, with technicians and all that, who didn't know really what what the use of them was there, but they're just there and they participate in the conversations and all that. And eventually people do drawings, and very, very early on in the process, they suggest stuff, and you start. And certainly in this day and age where everybody has a power book and goes on the web, and I would do an improv and some lighting designer or technician would say, the guy you were quoting, well, actually the quote is this, and then there's this whole thing that happens. So now I think we have the tools very accessible and cheap tools to invite a lot of people in the rehearsal room and to, not to desacralize the rehearsal room that's usually reserved to the director and the actor, but because my work is also a writing process, I think that if everybody there has their say, chances are their technologies or their craft will be better integrated, will seem more essential to the work because it's informed from day one. So what happens is that you destroy all of the hierarchy, the useless hierarchy of the writer and then the director and then the slave the actors, and then after that and then we bring in the technicians, and it's like that because just for practical reasons or economical reasons. So if you could find a way to make it current economically, to have people from day one, everybody there in the room, and everybody knows what the project is about, I think.
Of course, in opera, that's not possible.
Well, it was in part when we did The Ring, because when we rehearsed in Varennes, close to Montreal.
No, I'm saying with the singers.
We had a crew.
The singers.
We didn't have the singers, but we did have
late.
part of the crew, and we did have a lot of people in that room. Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm David Fillingham. I graduated from Brandeis University in 1981 with a music degree, and I went to the old Met, 62 to 70. And it feels to me that a lot of the great set designers like Zeffirelli, et cetera, are being very much ignored these days. I appreciate what you do very much. I'm not in any way suggesting otherwise. I was with Bread and Puppet Theater from 70 to 76, and we come from the same world. But it seems to me that a lot of art is mediated through electronics these days rather than the beauty of the art itself, and certainly the mechanical brilliance of Zeffirelli and people like that makes some of what we do look, excuse me for saying it this way, but pedestrian. Could you talk a little bit about art and design as opposed to technology and design, please?
Yeah, well, I would just like to say, since you mentioned the word Zeffirelli, I feel that's partly my territory. So, Zeffirelli is in his 80s now, and, in his time, he was a great theatrical innovator, and he did wonderful productions, but, his time was then. All art forms need to advance through the current generations of master directors and designers. And certainly as far as the Met is concerned, we do not ask for the Met to be overrun with technology. What we ask is great storytelling directors to create their best work at the Met with the tools that they wish to bring as part of that process. So there are directors who at the Met this past season, for example, we had 7 new productions. David McVicker, who's a very accomplished stage director, directed a new production of Anna Bolena, which there's nothing, there are no projections, it's all just old-fashioned scenery, but presented with a modern aesthetic. All the scene changes take place in front of the audience. We don't bring in the heavy curtain in between each scene. It's really what makes theater and opera interesting today is the wealth of imagination that comes from different directors who work in creating new work. Everything has to move forward. What Zeffirelli did in the 70s and 60s was terrific then, but it's not so terrific now. What's not interesting, I think, for an audience today is to see every inch of the Met proscenium stuffed with scenery. Sometimes, in some of these older productions, the scenery may look interesting, but you have no idea who's singing. So what we're trying to do is bring in directors who are trying, who are in touch with and who are creating the sensibilities and sensitivities and leading audiences today, and ultimately with the goal of pleasing them.
Well, something though, concerning Zeffirelli, I should say, but
if I could. Just that in the 60s, we had no confusion about who was singing and what the sets were.
Well,
Okay.
something, though, is if you come to see The Tempest, for example, that we're producing this year, it is without it's very little technology involved, and we never had this kind of conversation about technology on The Tempest. It's actually more of an homage to Zeffirelli in a certain way, where you would have, but it's a question of context. Certain pieces or certain artistic adventures do sometimes ask for a new vocabulary, so that sometimes involves technology, and of course, because we are heavily using excerpts of a context where we did experiment a lot with technology. So of course, that's part of our conversation. But there's many other contexts and projects that we have that have nothing to do with that, and where we do have an appreciation of, and we even do an homage to the craft of people like Zeffirelli or early stage designers who were amazing painters, amazing image makers.
But I think it's important that directors have the ability to draw upon what is available today to pursue their craft. You know, movies today obviously don't look like they did 30 years ago or 40 years ago. When Steven Spielberg started harnessing special effects on behalf of E.T. or some of the wonderful films that he made, those films couldn't have been possible 10 or 20 years earlier.
Well, there was a whole debate also in the black and white, the amazing black and white days of movies. It was just so fantastic, and how people, even Cocteau, swore that he'd never do a color movie, because when color invaded, said, well, you know, then it's all about something else, not about real. And then he eventually gave in at the end of his life and did a color movie. It's always, I think, when new tools come in and new paintbrushes come in and new colors come in, we're always wary of them and we're always afraid of them because we don't know them, and fear is always the cause of it. Always comes from ignorance, and because we don't know about something, we fear it anyway. But then these things kind of get introduced into the whole array of possibilities, so when you happen to be at the cutting edge of these things, of course, you're more vulnerable to the criticism, and than if you're using technologies that are kind of accepted or taken for granted.
Thank you. So we actually have time for one more question with apology, but our guests have other obligations. So please, if you would.
My name is Paulina. I'm a mechanical engineer here, and I went to see Götter Dämmerung with the MIT Art Scholars, and it was really magical. And I think you already answered my question, so I might let somebody else go. But I wanted to ask whether you said that people will become accustomed to the technology and used to seeing it, so whether you thought that would detract from the magic or detract from the piece.
No, I think that it's a question of, you know, when Eisenstein first presented the Cuirassé Potemkin, actually there's people who recount that in that first projection, some people hid behind their seats because they thought the boat was going to come through the screen, and were distracted by a lot of these things. And the first time footlights, electrical footlights, were people actually wrote about how electricity should not be permitted in a theater because the organic essence of the candles and all of that. And if you see too much the actors, you won't listen to them as much. And what's important in theater is the text. So and all these things were all these comments, and eventually people see the advantage of seeing the actors better as they, you know, and that's what I mean. So that's why I'm not offended, and I agree there's a lot of dangers and flaws, and we might have failed at times, and maybe in the case of The Ring, it was a bit overwhelming and whatever, but still there are some magical moments where a more accustomed audience to these kind of devices were actually looking at, listening to the singer, while others were going, what is this? I've never seen this. So of course, you know, and that's fine, and that's part of the whole process, and that's why I'm saying, you know, in 2, 3, 10 years, that'll be part of what people are used to. And that's also something I think is an important question, because it has to do with knowing what the audience knows about storytelling. And 25, 30 years ago, the audiences didn't know much about jump cuts and flash forwards and all of this vocabulary that television and rock videos and whatever movies that people have seen. Now people have a vocabulary. They're very educated people, even people who've never been to school, go listen to stories, go to movies and all that. And there's this whole thing that's developed with time, and you have to take that into account when you try to convey a story today. If you don't do that and you try to respect the tradition and all of that. People are at the end of the play before you are. So you really have to try to understand where people are in how they understand the story and if they're ready to follow you in any new way of saying things. And
Robert, Peter, just, you've raised our sights, you've raised our spirits, you've done just, I think, what we hoped would happen with Robert's residency here in celebrating the McDermott Award. And so we congratulate you. MIT thanks you. I hope you'll come back. And Peter, you're always welcome back, too. So thank you, everyone.
Well done.